Across continents and capitals, the world stands on edge. Tensions are rising as nations reassert dominance. Alliances shift and old rivalries take new forms. From Beijing's bold warnings to the West to renewed fires in Ukraine's skies, global power struggles are intensifying militarily and economically. In the United States, the line between national security and personal conduct blurs yet again, as sensitive military intel is found in unexpected places. And at the heart of the Vatican, the passing of a spiritual titan sets the stage for a historic conclave, one that may mark a radical shift in the Catholic Church's future. These are not isolated events. They are ripple of a larger wave, a planet reshaping itself under pressure. The rules are changing, the players are shifting, and the stakes higher than ever. The world is watching. The question is, are you ready to know what is really happening? Good evening and welcome to Flash News. I am Star Smart. Let's get into the details. You're welcome back. Well, in a strongly worded address that has sparked international reactions, Beijing has issued a cautionary warning to countries considering aligning with the United States-led efforts to impose new trade restrictions on China. The statement, which comes amid escalating tensions between the two largest economies in the world, marks a renewed push by China to counter what it sees as economic containment strategies led by Washington. President Xi Jinping, speaking at a high-level economic forum in Beijing, declared that trade wars have no winners and accused the United States of politicizing economic cooperations for strategic gain. He warned that the continued weaponization of trade and sanctions could destabilize global markets and deepen division in an already fragile international economy. China will not sit idly by while its legitimate right to fair and open trade is threatened. And these are the words of President Xi Jinping. He says, "We urge all nations to pursue policies of mutual benefit and shared prosperity, not zero-sum tactics fueled by Cold War mentalities." The Chinese president's remark follow recent moves by the United States to rally allies, particularly in Europe and the Indo-Pacific, around export controls, investment screening, and technological restrictions targeting Chinese firms in areas like semiconductors, AI development, and critical infrastructure. Washington insists the measures are necessary to protect national security and secure supply chains. However, Beijing sees them as thinly veiled economic aggression designed to curb China's rise on the global stage. In recent months, several United States allies, including Germany, Japan, South Korea, and Netherlands, have come under diplomatic pressure from both Washington and Beijing. While the United States frame and restriction as safeguard against espionage and unfair competition, Chinese officials have framed them as economic coercion that undermines global trade principles. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs backed Xi's statement urging countries to resist becoming pawns in a new era of containment politics. The ministry also warned that those who participate in what is called discriminatory and unilateral trade blocs risk not only retaliatory measures from Beijing, but also damage to their long-term economic interests. Economists are watching closely, with fears that a full-scale economic decoupling between China and the West could trigger disruptions in global supply chains, increase prices of consumer goods, and potentially plunge markets into volatility. Beijing has already begun exploring alternative trade routes and partnerships. through the Belt and Road Initiative and enhanced cooperation with the BRICS alliance. China is signaling that it will deepen ties with the global south and emerging economies if the West continues to impose restrictions. Meanwhile, United States officials have responded with caution and firmness. In a recent statement, the United States Trade Representative Catherine Tai reiterated America's commitment to defending its economic security, saying, "Our goal is not to contain China, but to ensure that trade rules are fair, reciprocal, and do not jeopardize our technological edge or national safety." Yet behind closed doors, there are concerns even among the United States allies about how far the economic standoff could go. Some European Union leaders have called for strategic autonomy, advocating for a more balanced approach that avoids being pulled entirely into a binary economic war between superpowers. With the global economy still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic and the ongoing Ukraine crisis, another front in the form of a United States-China trade conflict could have far-reaching consequences. As geopolitical rivalries harden and alliances grow more complex, Beijing's latest warning raised critical questions. Will countries heed China's call for economic neutrality or side with Washington's broader strategy to reshape the future of global trade? Away from the United States, tariffs and the economy as it impacts it, but take a look at the Eastern European conflict. We're talking about Ukraine enduring a renewed Russian airstrike as Easter ceasefire ends. We see that in this development that takes us back to Ukraine, there seems to be a renewed wave of Russian airstrikes that has cast a dark shadow over a region already suffering from years of conflict. Just days after the temporary ceasefire called for the Easter holiday, deadly attacks have resumed, pushing the ongoing war into yet another stage of devastation. Ukraine's military officials reported that in the early hours of today, Russian air forces launched multiple aerial bombardments, hitting both civilian and military targets across the country. Cities like Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Zaporizhzhia were heavily impacted, with explosions reported throughout the morning. The airstrikes come just after a brief fragile Easter ceasefire that was agreed upon by both parties, though humanitarian organizations and experts warn that the truce was never likely to hold on for too long. While the ceasefire has offered a brief respite to civilians in conflict zones, it now appears to have been little more than a temporary pause, with both Moscow and Kyiv accusing each other of violating the terms of the truce. The new bombardments have struck key infrastructure, including power grids and military supply lines, with several reports of civilian casualties emerging from the affected areas. Ukrainian officials, including President Volodymyr Zelensky, condemned Russia's actions, describing them as another desperate attempt to weaken Ukraine's resolve and undermine peace efforts. In response, Ukrainian forces have mounted a swift counteroffensive, but the situation remains dire. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense confirmed that they are focusing on repelling the aerial assaults while simultaneously strengthening their defenses around key urban centers. While Ukrainian civilians face the brunt of this violence, the renewed airstrikes are also intensifying the pressures on international diplomatic efforts. The United States has escalated its involvement, with President Joe Biden reiterating calls for a negotiated settlement between Moscow and Kyiv. The United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken held a series of talks with Ukrainian and Russian diplomats, urging both sides to return to the negotiation table to end the war that has now stretched into its third year. The United States officials have made it clear that while military support for Ukraine will continue, Washington is increasingly focused on finding a diplomatic resolution to the conflict. The White House has signaled that while it will not back down on supporting Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, a sustainable peace must be achieved through talks. Now, the diplomatic push comes amidst growing international concerns over the war's impact on global security and the humanitarian toll it has taken. Since Russia's invasion began in 2022, over 100,000 people have been killed and millions have been displaced, many of whom are seeking refuge in neighboring countries such as Poland, Hungary, and Romania. Humanitarian agencies report that the ongoing conflict has pushed critical infrastructure in Ukraine to the brink of collapse. Hospitals, schools, and essential public services have been heavily impacted by the continued bombardment, and experts are warning that the humanitarian situation could deteriorate rapidly if these attacks do not stop. Meanwhile, on the diplomatic front, the situation remains as precarious as ever, with the United States and European Union pushing for increased sanctions on Russia in response to its aggression. Moscow has remained defiant. Russian officials have dismissed calls for a ceasefire as a temporary setback, accusing Ukraine of using the ceasefire as a cover to regroup and rearm. As the fighting escalates, both Washington and the European Union are facing mounting pressures from the global community to take more decisive actions to bring about peace. Yet, there is a sense of frustration that despite the overwhelming international consensus on the need for an end to the war, Russia has shown little willingness to engage in meaningful talks. In Kiev, Ukrainian citizens are grappling with the heavy emotional toll of another round of violence, uncertain about what the future holds. The people of Ukraine, while steadfast in their resistance, are beginning to show signs of exhaustion from nearly 3 years of warfare. With the Easter ceasefire now firmly in the past and no immediate end in sight for the bloodshed, the question on the minds of many remains: how long can the international community stand by as this war rages on? Will the diplomatic efforts led by the United States be enough to bring Russia and Ukraine back to the negotiation table? Or are we witnessing the beginning of another chapter in a war with no clear end in sight? That remains a question to wonder about. But then on United States national security, we see the United States Department of Defense facing yet another credibility test, as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth comes under fire for allegedly compromising military communication protocols. According to emerging reports, Secretary Hegseth used his personal phone to share sensitive details about United States military operations in Yemen within a private Signal group chat, a group that included his wife, his brother, and several unidentified individuals. The revelation has sparked alarm in Washington and beyond, prompting the Pentagon's Inspector General to launch a formal investigation into potential breaches of national security procedures and mishandling of classified or operationally sensitive information. At the center of the controversy is whether Hegseth's decision to communicate via an encrypted but unofficial channel and to include non-military individuals constituted a violation of strict classification and information sharing protocols. Sources familiar with the group chat described its membership as informal and personal, but confirmed that it included real-time discussions about military strategies, troop movements, and engagement timelines related to the United States operations in Yemen, one of the Middle East's most volatile and strategically sensitive conflict zones. Now, legal analysts and defense insiders are calling the development deeply disturbing, deeply troubling, particularly given the Pentagon's long-standing emphasis on secure communication lines and the strict limitation on who can access operational information. While Signal is widely recognized for its strong end-to-end encryptions, experts stress that encryption does not absolve individuals from following clearance and need-to-know requirements. The inclusion of Hegseth's family members who hold no official role or security clearance raises red flags about potential breaches of the Espionage Act and other federal statutes. A spokesperson for the Defense Department acknowledged the ongoing probe but declined to offer further details, saying only that the matter is being handled with appropriate seriousness and that the department is cooperating fully with the Inspector General's office. Secretary Hegseth, a prominent political figure and former Fox News host, known for his outspoken conservative views, has not issued a public statement as of airtime. However, sources close to him describe the leak as unintentional and insist that no classified materials were directly shared. But critics, however, have argued that even operational context, when shared inappropriately, can be damaging in the wrong hands. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill have begun to weigh in. Senator Jack Reed, ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, said the report demand urgent clarity, while several House Republicans defended Hegseth, suggesting the investigation may be politically motivated. The timing of this controversy is particularly sensitive, as the United States continues to maintain a strategic military presence in the Middle East amid ongoing tensions with Iran, Houthi rebels, and terrorist cells. The Yemen operation, often kept out of public disclosure due to its covert nature, is considered a high-stakes theater requiring utmost discretion. The investigation is expected to explore several key questions because of this. First, to explore the fact if it was classified or sensitive information shared without authorizations, were federal communications and data handling rules violated. Could these incidents set a precedent for accountability at the highest levels of military leadership? As the Inspector General's probe unfolds, the implications for national security, military morale, and public trust in civilian leadership remain significant. If it is substantiated, the findings could trigger disciplinary actions or even congressional hearings to redefine how digital communication is governed within the highest levels of defense command. And on the very last report, we take a look at Pope Francis. The report of him being dead, sadly, we see that potential elections of first Black Pope is at the corner with the death of Pope Francis. The world is watching the Vatican with a blend of solemn reflection and historic anticipation as the Catholic Church begins the sacred and time-honored process of choosing its next spiritual leader. This follows the passing of Pope Francis, who died peacefully at the age of 88 after more than a decade at the helm of the 1.3 billion member global faith community. According to Vatican protocol, the papal conclave will commence within 20 days. A total of 120 cardinals under the age of 80, known as the princes of the church, will gather behind closed doors in the Sistine Chapel to elect the next pope through a series of secret ballots. This moment marks not just a transition of leadership, but what many see as a possible turning point in church history. Now, as prayers pour in from across continents, speculations is intensifying over whether the next pontiff could be of African descent, or that is a possibility that would shatter centuries-old norms and mark a watershed moment for the church, which has long faced criticism for its Eurocentric leadership. Among those frequently mentioned in Vatican circles are Cardinal Peter Turkson of Ghana and Cardinal Wilfrid Napier, South Africa, both highly respected for their theological depth, leadership within their regions, and commitments to global justice issues. While the Catholic Church has had popes from Latin America, Europe, and the Middle East in its long history, no pope of African origin has held this seat since the early centuries of Christianity. A Black pope in the modern era would carry powerful symbolic weight, especially at a time when the church is striving to remain relevant in an increasingly diverse and globalized world. The conclave's process is steeped in ritual. Once the cardinals are sequestered, they will hold 4 ballots a day, 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, until a candidate receives the required 2/3 majority. Until then, the world will look for the traditional signal, white smoke from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel, to indicate a successful election. In the meantime, the Vatican remains under the guidance of the College of Cardinals, with all official governance and public appearances paused as the Church mourns the passing of Pope Francis. His papacy was marked by a focus on humility, dialogue, social justice, and reforms on issues from sexual abuse, accountability, to climate change and poverty alleviation. Already, global reactions to the Pope's death and the upcoming conclave are pouring in. Faithfuls from Africa, Latin America, Asia, and beyond have expressed both grief and hope. Hope that the next pontiff may reflect the changing face of the Catholic Church, which is now growing fastest in the global south. Observers believe that this could be one of the most geopolitically significant papal elections in recent memory, a choice that will not only shape the Church's internal directions, but its voice on global affairs, human rights, diplomacy, and morality. Now, as the cardinals prepare to take their seats inside the marble halls of the Vatican, the world holds its breath. Will this be the moment the Catholic Church embraces a more inclusive future? One that could bring a Black Pope to the world stage for the first time in history. Well, while we wonder on that question, we'll draw the curtain close here on the Flash News with ABC Amba TV. Thank you for joining me. We'll leave you with ABC Amba TV images.